with a new threat to all of our First Amendment rights. After former CNN anchor turned independent journalist Don Lemon was arrested by federal authorities Thursday for covering an anti-ICE protest during a Minnesota church service earlier this month. Lemon, along with independent journalist Georgia Fort and others, were indicted on 2 civil rights charges: conspiracy against freedom of religion and interfering with the exercise of freedom of religion at a place of worship. Fort, who is also vice president of the Minneapolis chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists, released this video of federal agents at her door early yesterday morning. Also live streamed on Facebook moments before she surrendered to authorities. Take a look at this.
Right now, you guys, I wanted you to know I'm going to have to hop off here and surrender to agents as a member of the press. I filmed the church protest a few weeks ago, and now I'm being arrested for that. It's hard to understand how we have a constitution, constitutional rights, when you can just be arrested for being a member of the press.
Both Lemon and Fort have since been released. Outside the courthouse, Lemon struck a defiant tone, vowing to fight the charges.
I have spent my entire career covering the news. I will not stop now. In fact, there is no more important time than right now, this very moment, for a free and independent media that shines a light on the truth and holds those in power accountable. The First Amendment of the Constitution protects that work for me and for countless of other journalists who do what I do.
It's important to note, MS Now has learned that many career prosecutors in both Minnesota and Los Angeles refuse to be involved in this case, claiming the evidence does not support the charges. Listen to what Lemon had to say during the protest, making it very clear to everyone that was watching that he was there as a journalist, not an activist.
So right now it's kind of mayhem. We're not part of the activists, but we're here just reporting on them. So I'm just going to be as respectful as possible. I'm not here to intimidate anybody. I'm just here to chronicle and to get some answers and let people know.
Chronicle and get some answers. Joining us now, MS Now reporter Laura Barron Lopez and Ankush Khadori, former federal prosecutor and senior writer at Politico magazine. Thank you both for getting up with us this morning. Ankush, I want to start with you because there's just like 18 million legal questions here. We don't have time for all of them, so I'll try to get to a couple. The first that I keep hearing from folks, we were talking before this, is why is this man arrested? But I'm most curious for you, the use of the word conspiracy here, because that holds a lot of weight, right? That means there's some kind of coordination. And the use of the FACE Act that they're using here, which is supposed to be about protecting abortion clinics and people not going in there and protesting doing that.
Yeah, so the conspiracy charge, look, we often in the press, talk about conspiracy as a very heavy, laden thing, but a conspiracy is just an agreement. It can be explicit, it can be implicit.
Could it be him getting an email from activists saying, hey, we're going to be here, and him saying, I'm going to come cover it? Is that a conspiracy?
So this would be a fact question in a potential trial if you were really to get that far down the line, right? The question of whether an agreement has been formed is a factual question in any given case. As to the second question you posed about the FACE Act, you're right. We know it mostly because it's there to protect reproductive rights, access to reproductive rights. But it also contains a provision that applies to houses of worship and religious places as well. So those are the, that's the high-level structure of the charges. I don't really think that the legal structure of the charges is what's so problematic as much as the application to this set of facts, right? For a bunch of different reasons, including what was actually happening on the ground, the issues surrounding the First Amendment. I just think it's amazing that the same administration that pardoned all the January 6 rioters could get up in arms about something like this or pretend to be up in arms about it.
They know a little bit about intimidation.
Yeah, but the thing that I find really troublesome under the circumstances here, it was a week ago, as you just pointed out, that Alex Preddy was killed on camera by federal agents. And this administration tried to lie about it. What if there had been no cameras? They would still be lying about what happened to Alex Preddy. So we are living in a time, I think, in American life where we have to hold the line more than ever on the rights of journalists and just Americans, because those are just Americans who are taking those videos of Preddy's killing. on their ability to do these things without being intimidated or fearing that they will be criminally prosecuted on the flimsiest of apparent theories. I mean, having multiple judges and multiple prosecutors refusing to be associated with this or sign off on it.
And there's plenty of video footage of this incident as well that clearly showed Don Lemon and Georgia Fort doing their jobs. There are 2 courts that previously rejected arrest warrants for Don Lemon in particular, judges who believed there was not sufficient evidence and that the Justice Department would lose this case. They finally got the sign-off. But, Laura, can you talk about why the White House is so obsessed with Don Lemon in particular? I mean, they tweeted yesterday after this episode played out that when life gives you lemons, with the chain emoji and pictures of him.
It is very important that people look at what they're telling you. The chains and then a black man in a picture. That is very important. That tells you a lot about the way that they think about black people in this country. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, what is the grudge that the White House is so hung up on? Why did they go through with this? And what was the conversation like on the grounds yesterday?
I wasn't at the White House yesterday, but what I will say is that, to Eugene's point, yes, there is a pattern with how the White House, how this president treats black people, whether they're journalists or not journalists. There's also, beyond Lemon, I think that this president does have a fixation with reporters, with the press, with media personalities in particular, that he thinks are too critical of him. But it's not just critical of the president. It's just reporters who report facts, right? Who present the facts, who lay out patterns, who call what the president is doing, call a spade a spade. And if you do that as a journalist now with this president, you are called political by this administration and by this president and by this MAGA movement. And that is the pattern here. It goes all the way back to when he first entered the political scene, which is that the president made very clear that he viewed the press as the enemy of the people. Those are really strong words to describe fellow Americans who have the same rights that he has. And also, our work is one of the closest jobs that's enshrined in the Constitution. And
the only job.
Right. And so yet the president has made very clear that he has wanted to target the press from the beginning. And he has said to other journalists that he likes to discredit the press. Why? So that way the public doesn't believe us.
Said to Leslie Stahl.
Yes. And so, and other people who have followed the president, be it Marjorie Taylor Greene or other Republicans who have since split from him, say that this movement lies and never apologizes when they get something wrong. So I think when we look at this larger picture around what is happening with the attacks on Don Lemon and Georgia Fort and these prosecutions that are being brought, you have to look at the overall end goal of this administration, which is to discredit the press, the free, independent press, and to not present facts and to lie about the facts of different incidents that are happening on the ground when it comes to this administration.
And so, Ankush, that leads back to the 2 legal questions that I have. So they succeeded in arresting Don Lemon and Georgia Fort. Late Thursday night for Don, early yesterday morning for Georgia Fort. But this comes after 2 courts in Minnesota said, no, we're not, no. So how, this is part 1 of 2 questions, how did the administration have the legal wherewithal to arrest Don Lemon? How did they get these? How did they?
There were 2 parts.
No, that's the first part. The second part's coming after you answer.
First part,
Counselor.
They obtained an indictment from a grand jury, right?
So they convened a grand jury, or a grand jury was already impaneled, and they
probably already
went
impaneled, right? Okay. They presented an indictment to grand jury and got it returned. As you all know, it's a relatively low standard, a probable cause standard. But I want to flag one point on this, right? Because ordinarily we would say that a grand jury represents sort of a very signal, sort of important marker here. This is an administration that has abused the grand jury process multiple times over the last year. Let's recall what happened with the James Comey prosecution, right? I was surprised, I was surprised when that indictment came down, that it got returned by a grand jury. Lo and behold, we come to find out as that case proceeds that Lindsay Callaghan, who is the U.S. attorney overseeing that case, had made multiple misstatements, material misstatements of law to the grand jurors, and was like roundly criticized in an opinion by a judge, listing like a dozen irregularities. So I look at this and I see the tenuous of the charges, all of the irregularities around the judges and the prosecutors. I wonder what happened in that grand jury.
And part two of the question goes to something that I don't know if people noticed in Georgia Fort's video of the guy peering through her window, masked in a uniform, but the uniform says DEA. Why is the Drug Enforcement Agency involved in this kind of law enforcement action?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, this is an administration where they seem to think that bodies are interchangeable among the federal agencies as long as they're enforcing immigration policies, right, and doing immigration work. So that could be one thing. I think the bigger question is, why did they need to arrest her at all?
Right.
You can return an indictment and issue a summons for the defendant to show up at a court appearance later that day or the next day. And there were multiple agents, far too many agents necessary to execute a warrant like that. So this was for show. This was for show. Even with Georgia Fort, this was a demonstration, an attempt to intimidate her and other people in her position and to make a spectacle out of this. None of that should have happened at her home.
Well, you know, as Charles Coleman said yesterday on our air in the early moments after the news of Don Lemon being arrested, the process is the punishment. Yeah. The idea that these charges are going to stick is, you know, a foregone conclusion to legal folks. You tell me if I'm wrong, that he'll actually be convicted.
I find it very difficult to believe there will be a conviction at the end of the day.
But just dragging them through court and the money that's involved.
They posted photos of some of the protesters that they've arrested, which is not normal.
And then AI and changed the.
And a judge has already criticized them for that.
Yeah, Laura, we're going to have to break quickly, but you've done a lot of reporting on how DHS has been able to sustain these surges. And I want to get back to this idea of whether or not a DEA officer is equipped to be participating in one of these interior enforcement operations.